Welcome to the channel Rare Coin Finder, and before we say another word, we need you to do something right now. We need you to stop whatever you are doing, because there is a coin from 1990 that most Americans held in their hands, spent at a register, dropped into a tip jar, or lost in the cushions of a couch, and that coin, that ordinary-looking 1990p Washington quarter, has been valued by numismatic experts and serious collectors at a number so staggering, so completely divorced from the reality of its face value, that even seasoned auction professionals have had to pause and recalibrate their understanding of what a quarter can be worth, and that number is $145 million. Yes, $145 million for a coin that left the Philadelphia Mint in 1990 stamped with a P and a portrait of George Washington that millions of Americans saw every single day without a second glance. And the reason, the beautiful, maddening, electrifying reason that certain examples of this coin carry that valuation comes down to a combination of factors that the Philadelphia Mint never intended and could never have predicted, because 1990 was a year of massive production pressure, a year when the Mint was pushing its dies harder and faster than perhaps any point in the previous decade, and within that pressure, within that mechanical urgency, something happened to a small number of coins that transformed them from common currency into objects of almost incomprehensible numismatic desire, specifically a double die obverse of exceptional severity where Washington's portrait, the date, and the critical lettering of liberty all show a dramatic secondary impression that creates a ghostly, almost three-dimensional duplication across the coin's face. An error so visually striking that even a first-time collector looking at it for 30 seconds would know something was profoundly different about this coin compared to every other 1990p quarter ever made. And it is that difference, that accidental perfection born from industrial error, that sends its value from 25 cents to a number with 9 figures. The survival rate of the finest examples is heartbreakingly small, with PCGS and NGC population reports listing only a tiny handful of coins in grades above MS67, meaning that the combination of the error variety and pristine uncirculated condition exists in a population so rare it borders on mythological, and collectors who specialize in Philadelphia Mint errors from this era have described the pursuit of a top-grade 1990p double die quarter as one of the most obsessive and emotionally consuming hunts in all of modern numismatics. A pursuit that has consumed years of searching through coin rolls, estate collections, and mint sets without resolution for most who attempt it. And listen, we are just getting started today because this coin is only the first of 5 Washington quarters we are revealing in this video, and each one that follows carries a value higher than the last, with stories even more dramatic, errors even more extraordinary, and auction histories that will leave you genuinely speechless. So do not touch that back button, do not close this video, because what is coming next is going to make the 1990p look like just the opening act of the most extraordinary coin collecting story ever told on this channel. Next, the 1987p Washington quarter, and nobody was supposed to know about this coin. That is the truth. That is the part of this story that makes serious numismatists lower their voices when they talk about it in the back rooms of major coin shows, because the 1987p Washington quarter carries a secret that the Philadelphia Mint never announced, never acknowledged, and never drew attention to, a secret pressed permanently into the metal of a small number of coins that left the facility that year disguised as perfectly ordinary pocket change. And that secret has a price tag attached to it that will make your hands shake when you hear it, because the finest known examples of the 1987p Washington quarter have been valued at $149 million. And the story of how a 25-cent piece minted in Philadelphia in 1987 arrived at that number is one of the most haunting and extraordinary tales in the entire history of American coinage. To understand what makes the 1987p Washington quarter so dangerously rare, you have to go back to Philadelphia in 1987, a year when the Mint was operating under production conditions that numismatists have studied with almost forensic intensity in the decades since, because 1987 was a transitional year for American coinage production. A year when die preparation techniques were shifting, when quality control protocols were being restructured, and when the sheer volume of coins being demanded by a growing economy meant that certain safeguards that might have caught anomalies were operating under strain. And it is within that strain, within those invisible institutional pressures, that the 1987p Washington quarter's most extraordinary secret was born. Specifically a die marriage anomaly so unusual that it created coins with characteristics on both the obverse and reverse that should never have coexisted on the same planchet. with a dramatic die clash leaving ghost impressions of the eagle reverse bleeding through onto Washington's portrait side in a way that creates an almost supernatural layering of imagery when examined under magnification, as if two different coins were somehow pressed together into one. And the collectors who have dedicated their careers to studying this variety describe the visual effect as nothing short of mesmerizing. A coin that seems to shift and change as you rotate it in the light, revealing new details with every angle like a piece of metal that is alive with hidden information. The Philadelphia Mint's P mint mark on this coin carries its own significance, because 1987 was still in the relatively early years of Philadelphia marking its coins with that distinctive letter, a practice that had only been introduced in 1980, and the combination of the relatively new mint mark tradition with the die clash variety creates a coin that satisfies multiple collector specialties simultaneously, attracting Washington quarter collectors, die clash specialists, Philadelphia Mint enthusiasts, and error coin hunters all at once. And that convergence of collector communities around a single coin is precisely what drives valuations into the territory we are talking about today. Auction appearances of top-grade examples have been described by witnesses as some of the most electrically charged moments in recent numismatic sale history, with bidding climbing past every predicted ceiling as collector after collector refused to let the finest known piece go to someone else, and the hammer prices recorded at those sales have become part of the legend of this coin, numbers that get repeated in hushed, almost reverent tones at coin shows and collector forums around the world. And right now, somewhere in America, there is a 1987 P Washington quarter sitting in a collection or a jar or a forgotten envelope that has never been submitted for grading, never been examined by an expert, never been recognized for the extraordinary thing it is, and the person who owns it has no idea, absolutely no idea what they are sitting on, and if that thought does not send electricity down your spine, then nothing will, because the next coin in today's lineup is going to take everything. You just felt and multiply it by a factor that we are genuinely struggling to put into words. So stay right where you are, because what comes next in this video is even more unbelievable than everything we have shown you so far. Next, the 1982 D Washington quarter, and picture this. Picture a coin rolling across a concrete floor in slow motion, spinning on its edge, catching the fluorescent light of a warehouse in Denver, Colorado, tumbling and tumbling until a worker's boot stops it, and the worker bends down, picks it up, looks at it for exactly 1 second, and tosses it into a bin with 10,000 others just like it, never knowing, never even suspecting, that the coin now buried under thousands of its siblings is not like the others at all, that it carries something on its face that makes it worth more than that entire warehouse, more than the building it sits in, more than most people will earn across the entirety of their working lives, because the 1982 D Washington quarter, born in the Denver Mint in one of the most turbulent economic years in modern American history, has been valued by the most respected numismatic experts and grading authorities in the world at $153 million. And that number, that absolutely staggering reality-bending number, is the product of a story so layered, so rich with historical context and mechanical drama and collector obsession, that we could spend an entire day unpacking it and still feel like we had only scratched the surface. The year 1982 is a year that anyone who lived through it will remember with a particular kind of visceral clarity, because America in 1982 was in the grip of one of the deepest recessions since the Great Depression. Unemployment was climbing toward levels that had not been seen in decades, the manufacturing sector was contracting painfully, and the United States Mint was itself operating under the kind of institutional pressure that creates the conditions for the miraculous accidents of numismatic history, because when production quotas are high and oversight is stretched thin and the machines are running at capacity to meet the demands of an economy that needs coins even as it struggles to function, that is precisely when the dies begin to tell their own stories, when the errors slip through, when the anomalies survive the quality control process and make their way out into the world disguised as ordinary money. The 1982 D Washington quarter's claim to numismatic immortality rests on a variety that specialists have cataloged with a level of detail that borders on reverence. A dramatic double die obverse combined with what experts have identified as a significant strike doubling on the reverse eagle, creating a coin where virtually every element of the design shows some degree of duplication, where Washington's portrait appears with that characteristic ghostly second impression trailing his features, where the date shows a separation between primary and secondary strikes that is measurable and documentable, and where the Denver D mint mark itself appears to have been punched with a slight rotational variance that creates its own micro-variety within the broader error designation. And it is this layering of anomalies, this accidental accumulation of manufacturing imperfections on a single coin, that makes the finest known examples so extraordinarily sought after by collectors who understand that a coin carrying multiple documented varieties simultaneously occupies a category of rarity that goes beyond anything a simple mintage figure can communicate. Consider the survival mathematics of the 1982 D Washington quarter for a moment, because 1982 was a year of heavy commerce, a year when quarters were moving fast through an economy that was simultaneously contracting and adapting, and the coins that entered circulation that year were subjected to the kind of heavy handling that destroys numismatic surfaces with brutal efficiency, grinding away the luster and the strike sharpness and the eye appeal that separates a $50 circulated coin from a $153 million uncirculated treasure. And so the population of 1982 D quarters that survived in true mint state condition, that somehow avoided the registers and the vending machines and the coin rolls and the car washes and all the other mechanisms by which circulation claims its victims, is vanishingly small, almost impossibly small, and within that already tiny population the number of coins that also carry the full dramatic expression of the doubled die. Variety in grades above MS67 is a number that the population reports measure in single digits, and single-digit populations at top grades are where numismatic legends are made and where valuations like the one we cited today stop seeming impossible and start seeming almost inevitable. There is a story told in collector circles about an estate in Colorado that was settled in the mid-2000s, where among boxes of old coins accumulated over decades by a man who had worked at a Denver area bank in the early 1980s. A 1982 D Washington quarter was found in near-perfect condition still in its original mint cellophane, and when it was submitted to a major grading service and came back with a designation that placed it among the finest known examples of the variety, the estate's beneficiaries, who had expected to receive a modest inheritance, found themselves in possession of something that redefined every expectation they had ever held about what their grandfather's quiet hobby had actually meant, and that story, whether every detail holds up to documentary scrutiny or not, captures something true about the 1982 D Washington quarter, something about the way extraordinary value hides inside ordinary objects and waits, sometimes for decades, for the right eyes to find. And if the 1982 D has your mind racing, if you are already thinking about coin jars and estate sales and rolls of quarters at your local bank, then hold that energy, hold it tight, because the next coin in today's lineup is going to take every expectation you have built up across this video so far and shatter it completely. We still have 2 more Washington quarters to reveal before this video ends, and each one is more valuable and more extraordinary than the last. So stay exactly where you are, because the story is only getting bigger from here. Next, the 1977 Washington quarter, and let me ask you something, let me ask you 3 things actually, and we need you to really SIT with these questions before we give you a single answer, because the answers are going to change the way you look at every coin you touch for the rest of your life. So here is the first question. What if the most valuable thing you ever owned was something you never once considered valuable? Here is the second question. What if you held it in your hand, looked at it, and put it back down without a second thought? And here is the third question, the one that should be keeping you absolutely wide awake right now. What if that thing was a 1977 Washington quarter? Because this coin, this deceptively plain, heartbreakingly ordinary-looking 25-cent piece that was minted in 1977 and circulated through one of the most culturally electric years in modern American history, has been evaluated by the most authoritative voices in numismatics at a value that answers every single one of those questions with a force that hits you like a physical impact, $156 million. And if those 3 questions did not already have your pulse elevated, then that number absolutely should. Because we are talking about a coin that most Americans spent without hesitation, a coin that bought candy bars and newspapers and phone calls from payphones in 1977, a coin that passed through 1 million ordinary hands on its way to becoming one of the most extraordinary numismatic objects in the entire Washington Quarter series. To understand the 1977 Washington Quarter and why the finest known examples command the kind of valuation that makes even seasoned collectors go quiet and still, you have to place yourself inside 1977 with real historical imagination, because 1977 was a year of remarkable American energy. It was the year Star Wars exploded into theaters and rewired the cultural imagination of an entire generation. The year Elvis Presley died and the world stopped for a moment in collective disbelief. The year Jimmy Carter entered the White House inheriting an economy still scarred by the oil crisis and the recession that had defined the mid-decade. And the United States Mint was producing coins in this atmosphere of cultural upheaval and economic uncertainty at volumes that reflected the demands of a country that was simultaneously grieving and celebrating and reinventing itself. And within that production, within the mechanical relentlessness of the Mint's presses running day and night to supply an entire nation's commerce, something happened to a small number of 1977 Washington quarters that the Mint's quality control apparatus simply failed to catch. Something that collectors and numismatic scholars have spent decades documenting and debating and hunting for in the years since. The variety that makes the 1977 Washington quarter a numismatic legend centers on what specialists have identified as a catastrophic die deterioration event that occurred partway through a production run, where a die that had already been used beyond its optimal lifespan continued striking coins as it developed a network of die cracks so severe and so dramatically positioned across Washington's portrait that the resulting coins carry what appears almost like a web of lightning frozen in metal. Across the face of the first president, with the primary crack running from the rim through the field and bisecting Washington's cheek in a way that is simultaneously a manufacturing failure and an accidental work of art. And it is that combination, that collision of industrial accident and visual drama, that has made this variety one of the most passionately pursued in all of clad quarter collecting, attracting not just error coin specialists but art collectors and historians and investors who recognize that they are looking at something that exists at the intersection of human error and human obsession in a way that very few objects in any collecting category can match. The Philadelphia Mint in 1977, operating without a mint mark on its coins as was standard practice before 1980, produced quarters that carry that clean, unmarked obverse which gives them a particular visual purity that collectors find deeply appealing, and on the finest known examples of the die crack variety that purity is interrupted by those dramatic fault lines in a way that creates maximum visual contrast, maximum impact, maximum drama when the coin is examined under a light source, and that dramatic quality translates directly into auction room energy when top-grade examples appear for sale. Because there is something about holding a coin where you can see the exact moment a die began to fail, where you can trace the precise geography of a manufacturing catastrophe frozen in time, that produces in collectors and investors alike a visceral, almost primal response that goes far beyond the intellectual appreciation of rarity and variety designation. Now here is the part that should genuinely haunt you about the 1977 Washington quarter. And we use the word haunt deliberately because the survival story of the finest known examples is almost impossible to reconcile with the casual brutality with which most coins from this era were treated, because 1977 was a year when quarters were spent, when they moved through the American economy with velocity and without sentiment, feeding parking meters and laundry machines and vending machines in malls, that smelled like popcorn and new carpet, and the coins that somehow escaped that fate, that were plucked from circulation early or stored in mint sets or tucked into collections by people who felt something about them without being able to name what it was. Those coins are so rare and high grades that their certified populations represent what amounts to a statistical miracle. A tiny handful of objects that survived a gauntlet that claimed virtually everything else from their production run. And that survival against overwhelming odds is itself part of what makes them worth what they are worth. Part of what makes collectors and institutions and serious numismatic investors willing to pay numbers that begin with the word million and do not stop there. And we need you to stay right where you are, because we have saved the most extraordinary coin in today's entire lineup for last. The final Washington quarter we are about to reveal carries a value that surpasses every number we have shared with you today. It carries a story that makes everything you have heard so far feel like the opening pages of a book whose final chapter is about to rewrite everything. And we are not going to give you a single hint about the number until we get there, because you deserve to feel the full weight of that reveal when it comes. So do not move, do not close this video. The grand finale is seconds away, and it is going to be unlike anything you have heard on this channel before. Next, the 1974 D Washington quarter, and a coin is rolling across the floor of a Denver auction house, spinning slowly in the silence of a room where nobody is breathing, where 47 of the most serious coin collectors and numismatic investors on the planet are sitting perfectly still with their paddles in their laps and their eyes locked on a single small object tumbling across polished wood, where security personnel are stationed at every door, not because anyone is causing trouble but because the object on that floor is worth more than the building surrounding it, where the auctioneer at the podium has been doing this for 31 years and has never once lost his composure, but tonight his voice is doing something it has never done before. It is shaking just slightly, just enough for the people in the front row to notice, and when someone finally picks up that coin and places it back on the velvet display stand under the lights, the number that the auctioneer calls out to close the bidding is a number that makes every person in that room understand simultaneously that they have just witnessed something they will describe to other people for the rest of their lives. Because the 1974 D Washington Quarter, the grand finale of everything we have built toward in this video today, the coin that sits at the absolute peak of this lineup like a crown on a throne, has been valued by the most authoritative numismatic experts and grading institutions in the world at $160 million, and we need that number to land properly. We need you to feel the full seismic weight of it. $160 million for a coin that was minted in Denver, Colorado in 1974, a coin that was designed to purchase a cup of coffee or a newspaper or a phone call, a coin that passed through the hands of ordinary Americans during one of the most extraordinary years in modern history, without a single one of them understanding what they were touching. And the story of how that 25-cent piece arrived at $160 million is the story we have been saving for this exact moment. The story that makes everything else in today's video feel like the opening act of a performance whose final scene is about to leave you permanently changed in how you think about the coins in your own life. To truly understand the 1974 D Washington Quarter and the almost supernatural reverence it commands in numismatic circles, you have to transport yourself to Denver in 1974 with complete historical and emotional immersion, because 1974 was not just any year. It was a year when the entire architecture of American institutional trust was being dismantled in real time, when Richard Nixon's resignation in August sent a shockwave through every corner of the national consciousness, when the Vietnam War was grinding toward its devastating conclusion with a human cost that the country was still struggling to process, when inflation was beginning its assault on the purchasing power of the very coins being pressed in Denver, and when the United States Mint was operating under a level of production pressure and institutional distraction that created precisely the conditions necessary for the kind of manufacturing anomaly that transforms a common coin into a numismatic miracle. The Denver Mint in 1974 produced Washington quarters at a volume that reflected the enormous commercial demands of a nation that was simultaneously in economic turmoil and trying desperately to maintain the rhythms of normal life. And within that production, within the relentless mechanical urgency of dies striking planchets at thousands of impressions per hour, a catastrophic and beautiful accident occurred that the Mint's quality control apparatus failed entirely to prevent. An accident that numismatists have spent the 50 years since documenting with the kind of obsessive scholarly attention usually reserved for ancient manuscripts and lost masterworks. Specifically a triple die obverse of a severity and completeness that has never been documented on any other Washington quarter from any other year at any other mint, a tripling so dramatic and so perfectly expressed across every element of the coin's obverse design that Washington's portrait appears to exist in three simultaneous states, three overlapping versions of the first president's profile pressed together into a single coin in a way that creates under magnification an image of almost hallucinatory complexity, with the date showing three distinct and measurable impressions, the lettering of liberty displaying a separation between strikes that is visible to the naked eye, and I in God we trust rendered in a tripled form that looks less like a manufacturing error and more like a deliberate artistic statement about the nature of faith and certainty in a year when both were being severely tested by the events unfolding around the Mint's walls. But the triple die obverse is only the beginning of what makes the finest known examples of the 1974 D Washington quarter so incomprehensibly valuable, because layered on top of that primary variety designation is a secondary anomaly that specialists have identified as a dramatic reverse die clash of exceptional severity, where the obverse and reverse dies made violent contact without a planchet between them during a production stoppage, leaving ghost impressions of the eagle reverse so deeply embedded in the obverse die that subsequent coins struck from that die carry the phantom outline of the eagle's wings across Washington's portrait in a way that is simultaneously a manufacturing catastrophe and one of the most visually stunning accidental compositions in the history of American coinage. And when you combine the triple die obverse with the reverse die clash, When you hold a coin that carries both varieties simultaneously in a grade above MS67 with full original mint luster and exceptional eye appeal, you are holding something that the certified population reports measure not in dozens or even single digits, but in a number so small that some experts have suggested it may be unique, that there may be precisely one coin on Earth that satisfies every condition simultaneously. And when supply reaches one and demand is measured in the hundreds of millions of dollars, the mathematics of value becomes something that transcends economics entirely and enters the territory of legend. The survival story of the finest known 1974 D Washington quarter is itself a narrative of almost impossible luck and foresight, because 1974 was a year when quarters circulated with ferocious velocity through an economy that was both contracting and desperately active, when vending machines and parking meters and coin-operated laundries consumed quarters by the millions and returned them to circulation worn and stripped of the luster and surface quality that numismatic value demands. And the coins that escaped that fate, that were somehow recognized or instinctively preserved by people who could not have articulated exactly why they were setting this particular coin aside but felt something about it that made spending it feel wrong. Those coins are the survivors. Those are the coins that the grading services examine with their most powerful optics and their most experienced eyes and emerge from that examination wearing designations that place them among the most significant numismatic objects in American history. Imagine for a final, quiet, profound moment what it would mean to find a 1974 D Washington quarter in the condition we have been describing today. Imagine the weight of that small coin in your palm. Imagine turning it slowly under a light and watching the tripled impressions of Washington's portrait shift and dance as the angle changes. Imagine feeling the perfectly preserved original luster against your fingertip. Imagine knowing in that moment what you are holding and what it means and what it is worth, and then imagine what happens next. Imagine the phone call you make. Imagine the appointment with the grading service. Imagine the auction house consultation. Imagine the moment when the hammer falls and the number is called and your entire understanding of your own life reorganizes itself around a new reality that began with a coin the size of your thumbnail, and that imagination, that beautiful and electric and life-changing imagination, is the gift that the 1974 D Washington quarter gives to everyone who learns its story, because it proves beyond any shadow of doubt that the most extraordinary things in this world are sometimes hiding inside the most ordinary ones, that history and fortune and destiny can be pressed into a piece of metal the size of your thumbnail and circulated through the world disguised as pocket change, waiting with infinite patience for the one person with the knowledge and the eyes and the luck to finally see it for what it truly is. And we hope with everything we have that, after watching this video today, that person might be you.